On the morning of my 70th birthday, I unwrapped a gift that should have been a simple gesture, one of remembrance, maybe even reconciliation. Instead, it cracked open a silence 3 years thick and nearly ended 2 lives, mine included. It arrived without ceremony. A box left on my porch, no return address, no handwriting on the outside, just a plain white envelope taped neatly to the side. Inside, a card with 2 words in blue ink. Happy birthday. No dad. No name. Just that. But I didn't need a signature. I recognized the handwriting instantly. Slanted, slightly compressed, like the writer never quite trusted the page to hold the weight of what he meant. It was my son's, Nathan Ellery. I hadn't seen him or heard from him in 3 years, not since he missed the second Thanksgiving in a row and stopped replying to my texts entirely. There was no dramatic fight, no slammed doors, no shouting match. Just distance that grew legs. One skipped dinner, one silent Christmas. Then nothing at all. The box itself was heavy, about the weight of a thick book, and when I pulled back the tissue paper, I found a bottle whiskey, deep amber, dressed in a dark green label with gold foil lettering. It was a limited edition release, one of those bottles more suited for display than for drinking, the kind that collectors keep behind glass, unopened, admired. I hadn't had a drop of alcohol since my heart attack 3 years ago, when Dr. Patel laid it out for me in sobering detail. No alcohol, not even a toast. You want to see 75? Stay clean. Nathan had been there, sitting in the corner of that sterile room, thumbing through his phone while the cardiologist explained how quickly my heart could give out if I slipped. I remember thinking then that maybe he was just trying to distract himself from hearing something hard. But now, as I stood in my kitchen holding a bottle he knew I couldn't drink, I wasn't so sure. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. It helps more than you know, and this story, well, it's one worth hearing to the end. I placed the bottle gently on the kitchen table. The late morning sun came in through the blinds, carving the room into lines of gold and shadow. The whiskey caught the light and lit up like it was holding fire inside. For a moment I just stood there, watching it, remembering the ritual of it. Back when Margaret was alive, we used to pour 1 glass each after dinner on Sunday nights. Sit out on the porch swing. Let the silence do most of the talking. She liked hers neat. I liked mine with one slow-melting cube. It wasn't about the alcohol, it was about the moment it created. A full stop at the end of a long sentence. When my heart failed me, that ritual ended. Cold turkey. I hadn't touched a drop since, and Nathan knew that. I didn't open the bottle. Didn't even think to. I slid it to the far side of the table and turned back to my coffee, which had long gone cold. The clock above the stove ticked like it always did, a slow metronome for a house that had gotten too used to quiet. But something about that gift didn't sit right. It wasn't just the gesture, it was the distance in it. The kind of distance that looks like closeness if you don't squint too hard. The kind of gift you send when you want credit without conversation. I didn't feel anger. Not exactly. Just that particular sadness that comes from being remembered by someone who no longer knows you. I stared at the bottle for the better part of an hour. Finally, I picked it up, turned it over in my hands, and thought of one man who might appreciate it. Greg Sullivan, my son's father-in-law, was the kind of person who showed up early and never empty-handed. 2 summers ago, when a storm tore a third of my roof clean off, Greg was on a ladder with a hammer before I'd even made coffee. He's not the kind of man who waits to be asked. He just does. If anyone deserved something special, it was him. And I hated the idea of that beautiful bottle gathering dust in my house. Better to give it a new story, one that might actually end well. By mid-afternoon, the bottle was buckled into the passenger seat of my old Ford. Habit, I suppose, but the thought of it rolling around on the drive made me uneasy. The road to Greg's place wound through browning soybean fields and neighborhoods thinning out for winter. His house sat on a quiet ridge with a wraparound porch and a view that made you want to pause. When he opened the door, still wearing his red flannel and jeans dusted in sawdust, he noticed the bottle right away. "Thomas," he said, eyes on the label. "What's this?" "From Nathan," I told him. "I figured you'd enjoy it more than I would." "Oh." Greg turned the bottle over gently, as if it might break. "This is something," he said. "One of those you save for a special night." "Then make tonight special," I said, and I meant it. He grinned. "Don't mind if I do." It felt good to hand it off, to know it might be opened, shared, remembered. As I drove home, the sun slipped low and turned everything amber. But that bottle lingered in my mind, not because I missed it, not because I wanted to drink again, but because I couldn't stop wondering, why this gift? Why now? Nathan had never been a man of grand gestures. In his 20s, he used to borrow gas money and forget to pay it back. So where did this sudden generosity come from? And why pick a bottle he knew I'd never touch? That question would eat at me more than I expected. And by the time I got home, I knew something else for sure. I wasn't done with that bottle. Not yet. Because what I thought was just a gift, it was a fuse, and someone had already lit the match. That night, I made pot roast. Not because I craved it, but because the act of cooking something slow and familiar steadies a man. The scent of onions and carrots filled the kitchen like it used to in the years when birthdays meant company and voices, not mystery packages and old questions. I set the table for one, as I always did now, and ate quietly while the clock above the stove ticked in that same measured way it had for decades. I washed the dishes, dried them by hand, then stood at the sink longer than I should have, staring out into the dark yard. There's something about an empty porch swing at night it can feel like an accusation. I was halfway to bed when the phone rang. The landline. No one calls that line anymore. Not unless it's a solicitor or a ghost from the past. I picked up on the second ring. "Hello?" There was a breath, then a voice I knew better than my own. "Dad." Nathan. He said it like the words still fit in his mouth, but only just. "Happy birthday," he added, half a beat too late, like he was trying to remember how humans talk. I leaned back against the counter, heart suddenly unsteady. "You got my gift?" he asked. "I did." "Well," he said, voice suddenly more alert, "what'd you think?" "It's a nice bottle," I replied carefully. "Did you try it yet?" His tone shifted, just enough to notice, like a blade turning but not yet pressing. "No," I said slowly. "I gave it to Greg. Figured he'd get more use out of it than I would." Silence. Not the dropped call kind, the deliberate kind, the kind that gets built. "You gave it to Greg Sullivan," he said, voice cooler now, like someone carefully folding a napkin before flipping the table. "That's right," I answered. There was the sound of an exhale, long and even, then the click of the call ending. I stood there with the receiver still warm in my hand, staring at nothing. Something about the way he asked, about the sharpness in his voice when he mentioned Greg's name, settled like gravel in my stomach. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I lay in bed listening to the creaks and sighs of the house, the same ones Margaret used to call the old place's way of breathing. But they didn't soothe me anymore. Not after that phone call. Morning came gray and slow. I made coffee, drank half a cup, poured the rest down the sink. The mail arrived, just a stack of flyers and one bill, but I checked it anyway. I needed the rhythm, the ordinariness of it. Around noon the phone rang again. Local number, unfamiliar. I picked up. "Mr. Ellery?" a woman's voice said. "This is Emily Sullivan, Greg's daughter-in-law." My spine straightened. "Yes?" "Greg's in the hospital. He collapsed this morning. They're running tests, but they think it might be some kind of poisoning." The words didn't hit me all at once. They trickled in. "He was fine last night," she continued. "We had a small drink with dinner, and this morning he couldn't even stand." I didn't speak. My eyes had already drifted toward the kitchen counter, the empty space where the whiskey had sat yesterday. "Did he eat anything unusual?" she asked. My mouth felt dry as sand. But I gave him a bottle yesterday. From Nathan." The line went quiet, save for the faint beeping of hospital machines in the background. "I'll tell the doctors," she said finally. "If you think of anything else, please call me." I promised I would, then hung up and just stood there in the middle of the kitchen, the quiet of the house pressing in like a second skin. I opened the trash bin, not even sure what I was looking for. Something white caught my eye, a small plastic vial, like the kind vitamins come in. It had no label, just a faint dusting of white powder inside. My hands began to tremble. I didn't remember throwing it away. I picked it up. The cap was screwed on tight. Something about it felt wrong. I opened the fridge next. On the middle shelf behind the milk sat a mason jar with a splash of amber liquid in it, maybe half a cup. Leftover whiskey. I'd poured Greg a glass before handing him the bottle. I hadn't even remembered saving it until just now. My breath came in shallow gulps. I set the jar next to the vial on the counter. My mind flipped through names like a Rolodex in a storm. One stuck. Marvin Cho. 30 years ago, we served together overseas. These days, he ran a veterinary lab out near the industrial park. I'd helped him tow his truck from a ditch last winter. He owed me. I called. "Marv, I need a favor, quiet one." "What kind?" he asked. "Test something. A jar of whiskey and maybe a vial of something else." He didn't ask more. "Bring it after closing." That evening I drove out. The mason jar wrapped in brown paper. The vials sealed in a sandwich bag. Marv met me in the lot. Lab coat over a hoodie. Eyes narrowed. "This the kind of thing I'll regret?" he asked. "I hope not," I said. "I just need to know what's in it." He took the bag, nodded, disappeared into the lab. I sat in my truck, watching the sky fade from dull gray to bruised blue. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't need background noise to distract me from the thought, forming clearer by the second. Nathan didn't just send a bad gift. He sent a message. And if Greg hadn't drunk that whiskey, if I had, then what? Marv called the next afternoon. "Thomas," he said, "you're not going to like this. Tell me anyway. There's white snake root in the sample, extracted and concentrated, enough to kill someone with a weak heart." I closed my eyes. The phone felt heavier than it should have. "You said Greg drank it?" he asked. "Yes. And you didn't?" "Number." He let out a slow breath. "Then you dodged a bullet. Literally. When I hung up, the house felt stiller than it ever had. Not peaceful, more like a hunted silence. The kind you get right before something breaks a window. And that's where everything began to shift. Because I knew deep down, with the certainty that lives in the chest and not the brain that Nathan had planned it, that the whiskey had never been a gesture of peace. It had been an ending, gift wrapped in green and gold. The next step wouldn't be sitting still. It would be doing something, finding a way to turn fear into action. And from this moment on, I wasn't going to wait for another phone call or another hospital visit. I was going to start collecting everything I knew, and I wasn't going to stop until I understood exactly why my son wanted me dead. The vial disappeared sometime between midnight and morning. That was the first thing I noticed. I hadn't taken out the trash, hadn't even touched the bin since I'd dropped it in. But when I lifted the lid to double-check, the bag was sitting the wrong way. Not torn, not rummaged. Just turned. Neatly, deliberately, and the vial? Gone. My first instinct was to question myself. Maybe I'd moved it. Maybe I'd been more shaken than I thought, and thrown it out in another bag. But deep down, I already knew. There's a feeling that settles into your bones when something isn't right in your own house. Like the walls are trying to tell you they've seen someone you haven't. I checked the doors. The back was bolted, the front chain set. No windows cracked. No screens popped loose. I don't keep a spare key under the mat, or inside a fake rock. I don't even own a fake rock. The only other set of keys that existed besides my own was the one Nathan used to have. I never asked for it back. Never thought I'd need to. Maybe that was my first mistake. I didn't call the police. Not yet. I called Marvin. Told him exactly what had happened. He didn't hesitate. "That vial is evidence, Thomas," he said. "The kind that proves not just what was done, but who handled it. Whoever took it knows that." I stood in the center of my kitchen, holding the phone to my ear with one hand and gripping the edge of the table with the other. "You think they'll come back?" "I think," he said slowly, "they already have, and you didn't catch them the first time." The thought crawled up my spine. "You need to get law enforcement involved. Now, before someone tries to rewrite this whole thing without you in it." So I did. I called the sheriff's office and asked to speak directly with a detective. They patched me through to Detective Alan Voss, who'd been handling the Carson report. I didn't mince words. "I have a sample of poisoned whiskey. I have a missing vial from my trash. And I have a son who's suddenly very interested in a bottle he knew I couldn't drink. There was a pause on the line, not disbelief, but calibration, like he was deciding how fast to shift into gear. "Can you bring me the sample?" he asked. "And anything else you've documented?" "I can. Today? I'll be there in an hour." I didn't go empty-handed. Before I left, I opened the drawer by the phone and pulled out a small legal pad, drew a line down the center. On the left, I wrote, "What I know." On the right, "What I can prove." Under what I know, I listed, "Nathan sent the bottle." Nathan called to ask if I'd tried it. Nathan changed tone when I said Greg had it. The whiskey made Greg collapse. The vial vanished from my trash. I found no sign of forced entry. Under what I can prove, I listed, Marvin's test result, the leftover whiskey in the jar, my recorded call from Nathan still fresh in memory. No hard proof yet, just pressure. But I'd seen pressure crack stronger men than my son. Before heading out, I grabbed something from the desk drawer, a small digital voice recorder I'd bought back when Margaret was still around. She used to leave herself grocery lists on it. Now it was mine again. I slid it into my inside jacket pocket and pressed the record button just in case. At the precinct, Detective Voss met me in a plain office tucked at the back of the station. He looked like a man who ironed his shirts himself. Precise, unflinching. I liked that. I laid the mason jar on the table, along with a copy of Marvin's report and a typed summary of what I'd told him over the phone. Voss didn't interrupt. He let the facts land where they may. "You've done more groundwork than most of the people who walk through my door," he said finally. "I'm going to take this seriously." He asked me a few more questions. Who else knew about the vial? When was the last time I'd seen Nathan in person? Had I told anyone about Marvin's test result before this? I answered straight. No guessing, no embellishing. He nodded. "We'll send the sample to the state lab for independent confirmation. If it matches what Marvin found, we're moving forward. Attempted poisoning. That's not a small charge." I nodded too, but my hands stayed clasped tightly in my lap. Not because I was nervous, because I needed to hold something, even if it was just myself. "Mr. Ellery," he said as I stood to leave, "until we sort this, I need you not to speak to your son. If he reaches out, document it. If he shows up unannounced, don't let him in. Call us." That evening, the house felt different. Not safer, just watched. I checked the locks again, not because I thought I'd missed anything, but because I needed the ritual, needed the reassurance that something still responded to control. I cooked an omelet I didn't finish and washed the pan immediately, just to feel the warm water. I opened the fireproof box in the closet and added a new note. "Whiskey sample with police. Vial missing." I didn't know who I was writing it for. Maybe for myself. Maybe for the version of me who would one day look back and wonder when it all started to break. I slept on the couch with the hallway light on. I hadn't done that since the night after my heart attack. That fact didn't sit easy. My body remembered things my mind tried to forget. I woke at 4:30 not because of noise, but because some part of me believed it should. The thread I'd taped across the inside of the front door frame, an old trick from my army days, was still intact, untouched. But when I opened the door to fetch the morning paper, I noticed something new. A faint scuff mark on the metal strike plate, a scratch where no key should have rubbed, unless it was one cut slightly off-center. A copy. Maybe made years ago. Maybe used for the first time just days ago. I stepped back inside slowly, my hand still on the knob, and felt the room breathe. The fridge hummed. The clock ticked. The swing on the porch creaked once, even though the wind wasn't strong enough to move it. I walked to the kitchen table and sat down with the recorder in my lap. If I was being watched, I'd be the one to blink last. Then the phone buzzed. No ring, just voicemail. A new message. Nathan's voice, clipped and tight. "We need to talk. Sooner's better than later. Call me back." I didn't. I wrote it down, word for word, on an index card and slipped it into the box with the others. Because there was something in the way he said it, like he already knew I wouldn't respond. Like it wasn't a request. It was a move. A step in whatever game he thought he was still playing. But here's the thing. I'm not a pawn. And I'm not afraid of silence. Not anymore. I didn't call him back. I didn't have to. His message wasn't meant for conversation. It was a test. One of those open-ended statements designed to lure someone closer, to make them forget why they were stepping back in the first place. But I knew better than to treat proximity like peace. Instead, I took the day slow. I walked the perimeter of the house with a contractor's eye, checking latches, hinges, and locks. Not because I expected to find something broken, but because I needed to be sure no one else was getting comfortable in places that used to only belong to me. At the back door, I reset the thread across the bottom of the frame and added a second one, barely visible, thin fishing line stretched just low enough to catch a toe, not to trap, just to tell a story. And stories, I've found, are often the first thing to go missing when the wrong people get involved. By noon, I was in my truck, engine low, driving out to Nathan's neighborhood. Voss hadn't told me to go. In fact, he'd likely tell me not to. But there's a difference between not engaging and being blind. I didn't go to confront. I went to watch. Nathan's street looked like a copy-and-paste version of suburbia. Identical two-story homes, clean sidewalks, and manicured lawns. I parked at the far end of the block, 2 houses down, tucked behind a white van. His truck was in the driveway, polished, newer than mine by a decade. I waited. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. No movement. Then, the front door opened. He stepped out like a man who didn't think twice about being seen. Wearing a gray hoodie, jeans, casual shoes. Nothing remarkable. Except for the way he looked around, not to check the weather. Not even to glance at the mail, but to measure the space. Like someone deciding if the house still fit the lie. I watched him get into his truck and drive off, slow and deliberate. The garage door stayed open for 2 minutes after he left. Then it closed itself automatically. I didn't follow. I wasn't there to chase. I was there to see how he moved through the world now. Like a man with something to hide, and nothing left to lose. That night, the front thread was still in place. The back wasn't. I found it snapped near the base of the doorframe. Not torn. Cut. A clean line that said someone had known it was there and removed it like a surgeon, not a thief. I stood there, staring at the spot, my hand still on the knob. The new deadbolt was still locked, and nothing else inside the house looked disturbed. But the message had been delivered. They could get in. They could leave without a trace. Or they thought they could. I stepped to the trash bin and checked it carefully. The bag inside wasn't mine. It was new. Wrong brand, wrong tie. Someone had replaced it entirely. I didn't touch it. Just backed away, closed the lid, and sat at the kitchen table with the recorder in my pocket and the silence pressing against my back like weight. The phone buzzed again. A text this time. No name. Just a number I didn't recognize. Stop playing hero. You're not built for this. I stared at it for a long time. Then I wrote it down, word for word, time-stamped, and added it to the fireproof box. I didn't respond. Instead, I called Voss. Told him about the broken thread. The swapped trash bag. The message. He didn't say, "I told you so." Didn't scold me for going to Nathan's street. He just said, "We'll log it. Keep documenting. Do not reply. Do not engage. You're not alone in this anymore." But that's the thing. You are alone. No matter how many detectives or labs or friends you line up beside you, when the person trying to undo you shares your last name, it changes something fundamental. The betrayal isn't just intimate, it's cellular. That night, I didn't sleep in the bedroom. I sat in the corner of the living room with my back to the wall, watching both entrances, the recorder in one hand and my old army flashlight in the other. The house creaked like it always did, but now every sound came with an extra question. Was it the house talking, or was someone listening? Just after 2 a.m., a car idled outside. No lights on, no door opened, no engine revved. It just sat there, humming softly, like it was thinking. Then it pulled away. I didn't move from the chair, just noted the time, logged it, and waited for dawn. The next morning, a small padded envelope showed up on my porch. No return address, no postage, just placed there, like a dare. Inside, a photograph printed on cheap paper. My house. Taken from across the street, at night, the porch light on, the swing motionless, no figure in the shot, just the frame, just the proof. I put it in a plastic sleeve and called Voss again. He didn't say, "This changes things." He just said, "We're escalating." An officer showed up within the hour to photograph the porch, collect the image, and take a statement. It was no longer just suspicion. It was intent. Later that afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table with the legal pad again, drew a new line. This time, I labeled the left side, control, the right, fear. Under control, I wrote, thread cut, trash replaced, photo delivered. Under fear, I wrote, messages, visits, watching. I stared at the two columns and realized something. Nathan wasn't after silence, he was after control. Fear was just the tool. By early evening, a second message arrived. Call me before this gets worse than it has to. The language had changed. No more guilt, just leverage. I copied it down, sealed it in the fireproof box, and sat with a cup of coffee I didn't drink. Around 9 p.m., I turned on the porch light and left it burning bright. Not because I was trying to scare anyone off, but because I wanted them to know. I saw them. At 11:16 p.m., a second car idled. Different make, different rhythm. It stayed longer, 2 minutes, then drove off again. This time, I saw the shape of a person inside. Male, still, watching. The next morning, Voss called. The lab confirmed the extract matches Marvin's results exactly. It's enough to escalate. We're applying for a search warrant. I closed my eyes and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. When? Soon. Stay put. Stay quiet. Don't tip anything. But that was the problem. Nathan wasn't waiting. He was moving, testing boundaries, pushing lines. And I had the sinking feeling that if we didn't act fast, someone else, maybe even me, was going to end up in a hospital bed or worse. Not because he hated me, not even because he wanted me gone, but because somewhere along the line my son had started seeing people as problems to solve instead of people to protect. And once a man does that, once he trades relationship for advantage, there's no limit to how far he'll go to maintain the illusion of power. That afternoon I sat on the back steps, the swing still behind me, the photo of it now sealed in a file Voss had taken. I stared out at the yard, empty but not innocent. I realized something then. This wasn't about whiskey. It wasn't even about inheritance or grudges or buried family drama. It was about erasure. Nathan didn't want revenge. He wanted rewrite, a cleaner version of the story where I simply didn't exist. So I did the only thing a man can do when faced with a threat dressed up as legacy. I stayed standing. I stayed watching, and I wrote it all down. Every word. Every time. Because silence wasn't just dangerous, it was what he was counting on, and I had no intention of giving it to him. The warrant came through at 7:43 a.m. Detective Voss called less than a minute after the judge signed it. His voice was even, low, with that deliberate kind of calm that doesn't reassure, it prepares. We're rolling, he said. Do not leave your house. Do not answer the door unless it's us. Stay alert. Stay quiet. I didn't ask where they were going. I already knew. Nathan's house sat 2 turns off County Road 11, in a subdivision, where every home had its own pretense of uniqueness, shutters in different colors, decorative rocks in neatly mulched beds, but they were all built from the same bones. I imagined the convoy of vehicles moving through that neighborhood like a second shadow. A black sedan, a cruiser, plain clothes and gloves and bags ready to hold things no family should ever own. I didn't pace. I didn't fidget. I sat at the table with the fireproof box open and the recorder turned on, just in case. Not because I expected a confession, but because sometimes the silence tells you more than the words ever will. Outside, the October light was pale, watery, as if the sky itself was reluctant to commit. I kept glancing toward the window, expecting the swing to move even without wind. At 8:15, I allowed myself one act of disobedience. I got in the truck and drove 2 blocks past Nathan's neighborhood. I didn't turn in. Just stopped at a gas station parking lot where I had a clear line of sight. I watched as 2 unmarked cars pulled into his drive, officers stepping out with folders and purpose. Nathan opened the door like a man who thought politeness might still save him. No hesitation, no slamming. Just a carefully crafted face and hands visible at his sides. Voss was among them. I recognized the jacket. He spoke briefly, then presented the warrant. Nathan didn't protest. He didn't look surprised. He simply stepped back and let them in. The door closed. The garage stayed shut, and my son, my only child, disappeared inside a house that was about to be dissected. I didn't stay long. Just long enough to see the evidence bags begin to emerge. Two officers carried out a cardboard box sealed with tape. A third followed with something small and glassy, likely a jar. Maybe more than one. I left before they looked up. Didn't want anyone thinking I needed to witness this to believe it. I already believed it. I just needed the world to believe it with me. Back home, I poured myself a glass of water and held it without drinking. The air in the house had changed. Thicker, like whatever I'd been holding back for weeks had finally entered the room with me. At 10:06 a.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. 30 seconds later, the recording came in. Nathan's voice hushed but controlled. "They're here. You think this makes you right. It doesn't. You don't see the full picture. You never have. Call me." I didn't. I wrote it down instead. "You think this makes you right. Not I didn't do it. Not this is a mistake." Just that deflection polished like honesty. At 11:47, Voss called. "We found them," he said without preamble. 3 mason jars labeled WSR, rootstock, and tincture, 2 with dried material, 1 with liquid. "We're sending them to the state lab, but the labeling's deliberate, not accidental." "Anything else?" I asked. "Notes, dosage charts, instructions on preparing extract, estimated effect times based on body weight and cardiac history." He paused. "And a letter, unsealed, addressed to you. Just says, 'You'll understand why when it's over.' Then a hand-drawn sketch of a tree with the roots circled." I sat down slowly. Like the weight of those words was something physical. "Do you have him in custody?" "Not yet. He wasn't home when we arrived. We're filing a locate. He won't get far." I wanted to believe him, but Nathan was the kind of person who planned 5 steps ahead when the rest of us were just trying to survive the next one. If he was running, he already had a head start. That night, the back door chirped. The small alarm I'd installed screamed its cheap, high-pitched warning. I rushed into the kitchen, no one visible, but when I opened the screen, I found another message. Folded paper, thick black marker. "Stop letting them in, or I will." No signature, just the threat, one that didn't pretend to be anything else. I called Voss immediately. An officer arrived within 15 minutes, photographed the note, bagged it. The words weren't clever, they were clear. Someone was getting desperate. I didn't sleep. I sat at the dining table with the fireproof box open, reading the cards like scripture. Every note, every message, every timestamp lined up like breadcrumbs through a forest. Neither of us would make it out of the same way we went in. At 2:37 a.m., my phone lit up again. Voicemail. No ring. Nathan's voice was quieter this time, but still held that edge. "You're making a mess of this. You went to the cops. That's not smart. We could have handled this. You're not thinking straight. Click. We could have handled this." Those 5 words echoed louder than the threats. Because handled implies control. Handled means you saw the fire and decided to pour gasoline, not water. I logged the message, wrote down the time, added the card to the stack. Then I closed the lid of the box and set it back on the highest shelf, somewhere I wouldn't trip over it in the dark. By morning, frost coated the lawn, thin white crystals over everything, nature's way of drawing a line. At 8:12 a.m., Voss texted, "We have him. Brought in without incident. We'll update." I stared at the message until the words became shapes. Then I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was still holding. My hands were steady. My heart, not so much. At 11 a.m., I drove to the station. I didn't go inside, just parked in the visitor's lot and sat with the engine off. Across the street, a kid rode his bike up and down the sidewalk, back wheel squeaking. Life, as it does, continued. But mine had just shifted. A storm with my last name had finally touched ground, and I wasn't sure yet what would be left standing when it passed. They held him overnight in a temporary cell, not in general population, not yet. The charges were being prepared possession of a toxic substance, attempted poisoning, intent to harm with premeditation. Voss called me that afternoon. "His lawyer's already on it," he said. "You'll hear from them." I told him I wasn't interested in deals. "We're not asking you to be," he replied. "But you should know. People like this, when they realize their plan didn't work, they start rewriting the story. Fast." I asked him one question. "Is he talking? Voss didn't hesitate. He's not saying a word, not even to his attorney. That silence somehow spoke loudest of all. The next day I got the call I'd been expecting. The voice on the other end was smooth, practiced, and falsely warm. "Mr. Ellery, this is Michael Lang. I'm representing your son. I assumed as much. I'd like to meet with you. There's a way we might resolve this quietly. No trial. Minimal exposure for everyone involved. Minimal exposure for him, you mean? I think we'd both agree, Mr. Ellery, that dragging this through the courts helps no one." "That depends," I said, "on who's been hurt and who gets to walk away." He didn't push, not immediately. Lawyers rarely do. They wear patience like armor. "Would you at least sit down with me? One conversation. That's all I ask." I said I'd think about it. Then I hung up and stared at the fireproof box on the shelf like it might start glowing. Inside that box was every scrap of truth I had, every timestamp, every quote, every photograph, every broken thread across a doorframe, the weight of proof in paper and ink. It wasn't just evidence. It was memory made sharp. That evening, I drove to the hospital. Greg was sitting up now, looking better. Color in his cheeks, a half-eaten sandwich on the tray beside him. His daughter-in-law, Emily, smiled when she saw me. "He's been asking when you'd come," she said, stepping out to give us space. Greg grinned weakly. "You look like hell," he rasped. "I've looked worse," I said. "Not recently." "You're probably right." I pulled a chair close and sat. He didn't waste time. "They get him?" "Yeah. Voss has him. Caught cold." Greg nodded once. "Good." Then he looked at me, long and steady. "What happens next?" That question had been circling my head like a slow hawk. What did happen next? Did I press forward with the full charges? Risk a trial, the public mess of it? Or did I accept the quiet deal the lawyer would offer, and let Nathan off easier than he deserved? "You know what I'm going to say," Greg said, reading me the way a man reads weather. "If you don't finish this, he'll think he got close enough to try again." "He's still my son," I whispered. Greg's face didn't change. "And I'm still alive. You don't owe him the future at the cost of someone else's." I left the hospital that night with that sentence stuck like a splinter under my skin. The next morning I told Voss I wanted to meet Nathan's lawyer on my terms. A neutral location. No courthouse. No office with a mahogany desk and blinds drawn just enough to look important. We met in the back room of the local library, an old conference space they used for civic meetings and chess clubs. Lang was already there, tie loosened just enough to suggest sympathy. He stood when I entered and extended a hand. I looked at it, then looked past it. "Let's talk." He smiled, unshaken. Excuse me, Nathan. He understands the gravity of the situation. There's deep remorse. Is that right? He's willing to admit mishandling, that the bottle may have been tainted without his knowledge." I didn't reply. He continued, "But there's no confession of intent. He says it was a gift. That's the story. A gift that got complicated." I stared at him, letting the silence build. "You've seen the lab results," I said. "The labeled jars, the dosage notes, the letter addressed to me. We're prepared to argue all of that was exaggerated, misinterpreted. You ever seen your initials next to a lethal dose in your own son's handwriting, Mr. Lang?" He didn't answer that, just folded his hands on the table. "If this goes to trial, it becomes ugly. For everyone. Do you want to spend the next 6 months explaining your relationship with your son to strangers?" "No," I said, "but I will. We're offering a reduced charge. No attempted murder. Time served. Supervised release. Counseling. Number. Mr. Ellery. Number." I stood. "I'll see you in court." When I stepped out into the autumn air, it felt cleaner somehow. Colder, but honest. I called Voss and told him I wanted full charges pursued. "I'll testify. Whatever you need." He didn't say good job. He didn't say I was doing the right thing. He just said, "Understood, we'll move forward." And that was enough. A week later, I was served the formal notice. Trial date pending. Witness prep to begin soon. I sat on the porch that evening with the file box on the table beside me. Inside was everything. I added one more card to the stack. Lang meeting. Offer refused. Trial confirmed. I stared out at the street and let the weight of it settle, not just the legal weight, but the personal one. There's no going back after you choose justice. There's only forward. And sometimes forward means walking alone into a room full of people who will call your son the defendant. But I had made my peace with that. Because this wasn't about revenge. It was about drawing a line between who I raised and who he had chosen to become. The courthouse smelled like old wood and worry. It had the hush of a church, but none of the grace. The morning of the preliminary hearing, I sat in a stiff-backed pew behind the prosecution table, hands folded in my lap like I was holding something breakable. Voss sat to my right, calm as ever, his notepad ready. The assistant district attorney, a sharp woman named Carmen Price, nodded politely when I arrived, but didn't make small talk. I liked that. Some truths don't need warming up. Nathan entered from a side door, flanked by 2 deputies. He wore county orange, his hair slightly longer than usual, but still parted with care. His eyes scanned the room like a man checking for cracks in a wall. He saw me. Of course he saw me. But he didn't flinch. No nod, no smirk. Just that flat, unreadable stare that I used to call teenage defiance. Now, it looked like something else entirely: strategy. The judge, a gray-haired woman with a voice like gravel and a tolerance for nonsense that hovered near zero, called us to order. We are here to determine whether the charges against the defendant warrant a full trial. Mr. Lang, Miss Price, proceed. The ADA stood, composed. Your Honor, the state will present evidence that the defendant, Nathan Ellery, knowingly and deliberately attempted to poison 2 individuals, his father and his father-in-law. The method was calculated. The delivery intentional. The evidence irrefutable. Lang, of course, objected. We intend to show this was an unfortunate misunderstanding, not a crime. The judge lifted an eyebrow. Let's see what we're misunderstanding. They called Greg Sullivan first. He walked with a cane now, slower than I'd ever seen him, but his voice was steady. I had a single glass of whiskey with dinner. Within hours, I collapsed. Hospital said it was a toxin. I didn't know the bottle came from Nathan until later. Lang tried to poke holes. Could your reaction have been related to medication interactions? No, Greg said firmly. I've been on those pills for 10 years. Never had a problem until I drank what Nathan sent. The jury, though this wasn't their turn yet, shifted. I could feel it. That subtle lean when people start believing the man on the stand isn't just recounting facts, he's telling the truth. Voss testified next. Brought in the jars. The notebook. The photograph of my porch. Carmen walked the court through each one methodically. Detective, were the materials found labeled in a way consistent with intentional use? Yes. WSR is a known abbreviation for white snake root. The dosage notes referenced cardiac risk and estimated onset times. Did the defendant offer any explanation? He invoked his right to remain silent. Did the materials include references to the victims? Yes. Initials matching Greg Sullivan and Thomas Ellery. Next to calculated doses. Carmen turned. No further questions. Then, it was my turn. I walked to the stand slowly, not because I was tired, but because I wanted the weight of the moment to land properly. The bailiff swore me in. I sat. Carmen stood just a few feet away. Mr. Ellery, please state your relation to the defendant. He's my son, I said. The words sounded foreign, like they belonged to a past tense. She guided me through the timeline. The gift, the phone call, the missing vial, the alarm on the door, the threats. Why didn't you open the bottle yourself? I have a heart condition. My son knew that. He was there when the doctor told me I couldn't drink anymore. Why did you give it to Mr. Sullivan? I thought it was a generous gift. Too good to waste. I didn't know it was bait. Lang rose for cross-examination. Mr. Ellery, he began, voice smooth as lacquer, isn't it true that you and your son have been estranged for several years? That's true. Isn't it also true that your son was unhappy with how his mother's estate was handled? He was disappointed. Yes. So we have motive for bitterness on both sides. We have context, I said, not justification. He paced once, slowly. Could it be, Mr. Ellery, that you interpreted your son's silence, and later his gift, through a lens of suspicion? I interpreted it through a hospital room, through test results, through a nearly dead man. You're aware, he said, holding up a report, that a handwriting expert has disputed your claim that the letter was written by your son. I don't need a stranger to recognize my own son's loops and pressure points. I changed his diapers and signed his report cards. I know how he writes. Lang's smile cracked. Just barely. No further questions, he muttered. The judge recessed for an hour. When we returned, she didn't waste time. There is more than enough to proceed, she said, tone-clipped. Trial will be scheduled. All parties will be notified. Bang of the gavel. That was it. Nathan stood as they led him out. This time he looked at me. Really looked. And for a second, just a second, I saw the boy I once carried on my shoulders. The one who'd cried when his goldfish died. The one who'd tried to make the backyard swing go high enough to touch the clouds. But the second passed. And what I saw next was colder. Not regret, not remorse, just calculation. And that, more than anything, told me we were beyond return. I walked out into the daylight. It was bright and too warm for October. The sun felt off, but the wind still told the truth. The trial began on a Tuesday, under a sky so clear it felt like mockery. The kind of weather people plan weddings around. But inside the courthouse, the air was dry and still, like it had been bottled up with all the truths no one wanted to say aloud. The courtroom was fuller now, reporters with quiet cameras, strangers who'd read headlines, neighbors I hadn't seen in years, pretending they were only curious. No one sat beside me. I didn't want them to. Nathan wore a suit this time, charcoal gray, tailored to suggest composure. His hair was trimmed, his posture perfect. You'd have thought he was the attorney, not the accused. When he looked at me, there was no plea in his eyes, no apology. Just that same steady calculation measured distance, like I was a set of coordinates he no longer recognized. The prosecution opened strong. Carmen Price laid out the timeline like a surgeon exposing the organs. The bottle, the phone call, the toxins, the messages, the porch photo, the missing vial, and the notes from Nathan's own desk. This is not a case of carelessness, she said. It's a case of control. A son who believed he could erase his father without consequence. Her voice didn't rise. She didn't need it to. The weight of her words carried more than volume ever could. Lang followed with his opening. He painted Nathan as the misunderstood child of a fractured family, someone trying to reconnect through a meaningful gift, only to have that gesture twisted by a paranoid man with unresolved guilt. There was no motive, he said, no confession, no fingerprints on poison, just assumptions, and a history of silence between two men who never learned to speak. The first 2 days moved like slow thunder. Witnesses confirmed the forensic chain of custody. Experts testified about the chemical composition of the tincture concentrated white snake root, carefully filtered, suspended in alcohol. One doctor stated plainly, if Mr. Ellery had consumed a glass with his cardiac history, he likely would not have survived the night. That landed. The jury blinked. One woman in the front row covered her mouth with her hand. I testified again on day 3. Carmen kept it clean factual. She let me speak like a man, not a victim. I told them what I saw, what I heard, what I remembered, not just about the bottle or the messages, but about the quiet unraveling between Nathan and me over the years. He wasn't always like this, I said, but distance can grow teeth. Lang pressed harder this time. Isn't it true, Mr. Ellery, that you once threatened to cut your son out of your will? I never threatened. I told him the truth. Trust isn't a guarantee. It's earned. So there were financial tensions. There were expectations. He didn't meet them. And could this animosity have gone both ways? Of course, I said. Hurt doesn't have a one-way street, but only one of us turned it into a map. There was a moment then quiet, fragile, when I almost wished he'd object. But he didn't, just stood there, flipping his pen between his fingers like he was waiting for something more damning that never came. Nathan didn't testify. His choice. Or his lawyers. I couldn't decide which. Maybe they both knew that letting him speak was too much of a risk. His silence had always been louder than his words anyway. Closing arguments came on a Friday. Carmen was relentless, deliberate. This was not a misstep. It was a plan. Conceived, prepared, delivered. The defendant counted on indifference, on history, on being believed, because who would ever suspect their own son? She turned to the jury. But evidence doesn't care about blood. Truth doesn't play favorites. Lang pushed the sympathy angle one last time. There is no proof of intent, he insisted. No video, no confession. Just a son trying to reach out the only way he knew how, and a father too proud to accept it. I wondered if he believed it, if somewhere under that practiced tone there was doubt of his own. The jury deliberated for 8 hours, long enough to worry, not long enough to hope. When they returned, the room stiffened. Everyone sat straighter. The foreman stood. On the count of attempted murder in the second degree, we find the defendant, Nathan Ellery, guilty. A breath passed through the courtroom, collective and sharp. Nathan didn't move. No drop of the shoulders, no tremble of the jaw. He blinked once, then looked at me and smiled. It wasn't triumphant. It wasn't even cruel. It was something worse, empty. Sentencing day came 2 weeks later. The courtroom was quieter this time. Fewer reporters, fewer spectators. Just the people who couldn't look away anymore. Nathan walked in wearing the same gray suit, though the cuffs hung looser now, as if the fabric itself had begun to give up on him. He didn't look at me. Not at first. Only when the judge entered did his eyes flick my way, brief, sharp, then gone again, like a man glancing at a shadow he refused to claim. The judge spoke with the weight of finality, her tone hard enough to leave marks. This court has considered the evidence, the testimony, and the jury's verdict. The defendant's actions showed premeditation, calculation, and an indifference to human life, including that of his own father. This court sentences Nathan Ellery to 25 years in state prison with no possibility of parole for the first 15. The gavel struck. The sound was small, but it echoed like a rifle shot through the room. Nathan finally turned then, eyes locking on mine. For the first time since this began, there was something there. Not calculation, not triumph, not even anger. Just recognition. As if he'd only now realized this wasn't a story he could rewrite. The deputies took him by the arms and led him out. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. The door shut behind him, and that was it. Afterward, I walked out into the autumn air. The sky was gray, heavy with rain that hadn't yet come. People brushed past me on the courthouse steps, some nodding, some whispering, some avoiding my eyes altogether. I didn't care. I wasn't listening. My ears were still full of that single word, guilty. Greg met me on the sidewalk. He leaned heavier on his cane, but stood tall. "It's done," he said quietly. "For now," I replied. Because the truth is, verdicts end cases, not consequences. Blood doesn't dissolve in a courtroom. It follows you home. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the fireproof box open for the last time. Inside were all the cards, the notes, the evidence I'd written down with trembling hands. I read each one slowly, like prayers that never reached heaven. Then I placed them back in order, closed the lid, and locked it. Not to forget, to remember differently, to make peace with the fact that memory can be both weapon and wound. The porch swing creaked in the wind outside. For weeks it had sounded like a threat. That night, it sounded like what it used to be, a seat for a boy who once wanted to touch the sky. I closed my eyes and let that memory come, untainted, if only for a moment. Because justice may be blind, but a father never is. And when morning came, I was still here. Not erased, not rewritten, just standing. And sometimes, that's the only victory left. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this story. If you've listened all the way through, it tells me something important you care about, stories that go deeper than headlines, stories that reveal the raw truth about family, choices, betrayal, and the price of silence. These aren't just stories meant to entertain. They're reminders of how fragile trust can be, how quickly love can fracture, and how every decision, big or small, carries weight. And if this resonated with you, if you found yourself holding your breath at certain moments or asking, "What would I have done?" then I'd like to invite you to be part of something bigger. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the next story. Because every week we bring you narratives that are gripping, haunting, and thought-provoking stories that don't just pass the time but stay with you long after they're over. When you subscribe, you're not just clicking a button. You're joining a community of listeners who value storytelling that respects their intelligence and their emotions. And when you leave a comment sharing where you're listening from, or how the story touched you, you're adding your voice to a larger conversation. That conversation matters because it proves that stories still have the power to connect us, even across miles and screens. So before you move on to the rest of your day, take a second now. Hit that subscribe button, tap the bell so you'll know when a new story arrives, and let us know where in the world you're listening from. Your presence here makes all the difference.